Okay, so thank you for your patience. We had a technical glitch that fortunately we solved very quickly. Um, Welcome back to the Creative PEC webinar series. And thank you for joining us for the last seminar of the calendar year. For those who are not familiar with the work of the Creative PEC, we have been active since 2018, and thanks to funding from the Arts and Humanities Research Council in the UK, our aim is to keep improving the quality of evidence for the creative industries, informing industry and government priorities, and advance research into the long-term challenges and opportunities facing the sector. Since June 2023, the center is hosted by Newcastle University in partnership with the Royal Society of Arts. Now, this seminar series is developed to showcase cutting-edge research, like today, and foster dialogue across academia, policy, and creative practice. Each session delves into fresh research, followed by an interactive Q&A session. People can sign into the webinar series. The next semester series is still in preparation, so please sign to our newsletter and keep an eye on our website and social media channels. Now, I'm delighted today to introduce Dr. Trilce Navarrete. Trilce is a lecturer at Erasmus University Rotterdam. She's a renowned expert in the economic and historic dimensions of digital heritage. And at Erasmus University Rotterdam, she leads the Horizon Project Recharge, focused on participatory business models. And she serves as scientific director of the AI in Art and Digital Culture practice at ECDA, a digital lab that examines issues of creativity, job market, cultural participation, governance, societal transformation, and human-centered AI. Now, before I give the floor to Trilce, a quick reminder of the rules to all those online that the seminar is being recorded, and following Trilce's talk, we'll have a Q&A session. Please use the Q&A function to pose your questions, and we'll make sure that they reach Trilce. If she cannot answer all of your questions online, we'll pass them on to her and try to deliver answers to you. Thank you for your cooperation and also for your patience in listening to this long message. Now, without any further ado, I'd like to give the floor to Trilce, who's going to speak about digital culture, emerging trends in museums online. Trilce, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you, Giorgio. Thank you for that great invitation. For the invitation and for that great introduction. I guess I'll share my slides now.
Yes, please.
So let's see. Here we go. Can you see him okay?
Yes, perfect.
Super. Okay. So yes, you just said, I just a quick one over myself, not to repeat. So I'm an assistant professor at the Erasmus University Rotterdam, the group of arts and culture. Not to forget the group that's hosting the ASSE, the Association for Cultural Economics International Conference, this coming June in 2025. So I'll invite you all to check out the website and send your proposals by the 1st of February. So about me, I'm working with a couple of clubs, let's say, just to give you a flavor. My background is on art history, then I moved to cultural economics and information science. And so for me, it's very logical to work with the economics of digital heritage, bringing all these three topics together. I've generally worked mostly with museums, and so I know them quite well. I love them because they really reflect, in my view, they reflect society and some of the things we're going through. And yes, as Giorgio mentioned, one of the new projects is this digital lab that we launched with some colleagues, and for which we'll be doing some joint research in the coming period, trying to understand what happens with this digital culture. And you mentioned some of the clubs like the ASSE and the Recharge. I had to add, the Creative PEC, which I'm part of the network of researchers, fellows, fellow researchers. The Erasmus Center for Data Analytics, that's where the lab is located, and the International Council of Museums. I'm chairing the International Committee on Documentation. So I look very much at the back end of museums, sort of the technical side. And I'm also part of the European Group of Museum Statistics, where we try to now develop some data collection tools in order to understand what's going on with digital museum visitors. On the EIT Culture and Creativity, Erasmus has been one of the funding partners, and we're considering also leading the new strategic topic group on AI, but more on that soon. So I wanted to share, there's, I think, one major change that's visible currently, and that is that the definition of culture is changing. When you compare to how people used to go to a museum, to a film, or to a theater, that's no longer the case. Some people still do that, many, thankfully, but many also take all of their cultural participation from one browser. This is a major change in the conceptualization of what is culture, as well as, you know, when you are in the one browser looking at your film, your theater, and your museum, you still have as well all sorts of other content. And so that this division of high arts and low arts has really become quite diffuse, more so than we have ever seen it before. And so with that, I argue that there is this fundamentally different notion on what's digital cultural participation. You know, we've talked before about that notion of participation is part of the production, and you know, Vicky, for instance, at the Camestor has done a lot of work in trying to theorize what does that mean. So, for instance, for funders, is also a form of participation, and other forms of co-creation. But I think it's gone much further, and I think we'll continue to go further as we have these new technologies. So with that in mind, I've been working on trying to define what is, and again, going back to my obsession, which is museums, keeping it a little bit more manageable, trying to understand what is this digital museum. And so understanding digital culture from the museum perspective, trying to then define digital museums. And I define that as a service provided by a museum, which can be accessed remotely or in hybrid form, is information-based. So that means, it can use multiple representation methods, but that means is, or maybe I'm jumping myself, I should read it. So it's information-based and can use multiple representation methods, such as text or moving image, and dimensions from 2 to XD, so extended reality. As such, a digital museum is not necessarily confined to the organizational boundaries and can be experienced as unity or in fragmented form. So what does this mean? I'll just break it up a little bit so you can follow what I mean. So first of all, a digital museum is a service, which can be also, you know, product for free or paid, provided by a museum. So I argue that it must originate from the museum. It's not the same as if whoever individual take a picture of the painting and put it online. That's not part of it. It needs to go from the museum institution, which can be accessed remotely or in hybrid form, so at the physical museum or anywhere. It is information-based, therefore, and it's a carrier to mediate consumption, and can use multiple representation methods, such as of an idea, such as text or moving image, and dimension. So it's dependent on hardware and software. This is also important. As such, a digital museum is not necessarily confined to the organizational boundaries. So that means a building or social media account or a website, and can be experienced as a unity or in fragmented form. So it can also be as derivatives or in a third-party website. And this very much comes from following up from the definition of the new definition of a museum, which now includes also a number of other activities. It used to be just kind of EC, research, conserve, exhibition, collection, and interpretation. but it has moved actually now to include, it never had somehow education anyways. So now it has moved to have research at the beginning, followed by collection, conservation, interpretation, and exhibition, open to the public, diverse, sustainable, that operate and communicate ethically, professionally, and with the participation of communities. So that's also major. The communities are the core, where museums need to also offer education, enjoyment, and reflection and knowledge sharing. So this is quite a big bundle. What do I mean by that? So looking at where will the digital museum be placed, I've done some research, and maybe easy to understand is the Wikipedia. So this is a third party, let's say, but the images come from the museum digitizes and they post it. There's also a number of images that are posted by users of Wikipedia. So this is a link that's been needing to be coordinated better, so the museum send their best images, best quality, and is properly metadata, so that they can really be used and to illustrate some of the articles. Other examples are the Instagram. So this is from the Uffizi galleries. So it's sort of a collection of pictures, sometimes with stories or videos. And then from the Versailles VR exhibition. And then below you have from the Estonia National Museum these e-readers, in which when you come in, you have a choice of language. And so every time you move around, the e-reader will adjust to the language chosen. Something I love about this National Museum in Estonia is that all of these models are 3D prints of their community. So they have clothing of particular sizes, and they always ask their community, we need somebody with such size, so big, so tall. If you fit the description, please come. And so they will 3D the individual in great poses, and then have this as their mannequins. I think it's a brilliant example of participatory practices. Another example, this is, I have some videos, but I think we can, given the time, we can skip them. I share the slides also with the links. This is a video game from Egyptian Museum in Torino. It's one of the best practices, again, on trying to use digital technology to find new ways to bring the collections of interest to the audience. Whoops, no, let's skip that. Another example is this, whoops, sorry. So they're all starting. Another example is this from the South Korean Museum, and maybe, I see it's distorted somehow. It's the image of a room in which you come in, and then you have an animation of, maybe I can put it on the silent, so while I speak, you can see it. So it's an animation of the paintings with beautiful music curated, all the images and all of the music, and it's meant to inspire the individuals to discover later the collections. And so these are short films based on whatever the exhibitions they have on. And then you come into the museum, first you go into this room, which is full of people, and people stay there for quite some time to watch all the movie, let's say. And then they go further to the museum to see the real objects and the rest. It's very nicely done also with AI. And let's see, how do we change? And then the last example is this, you might have heard with AR and VR, the Mona Lisa painting has been developed. And so it's a whole experience in which you understand how Mona Lisa is 3D, also with her whole landscape. And so this was quite a project to try to understand, within the scholarly boundaries, let's say, how you could represent a painting of such, like the Mona Lisa. And so these are just some examples that I wanted to share. And then I wanted to share also one of the projects that we've been doing together with Stefano Russo and with Bartosz Jusipenko on the and on the younger generation, the Generation Z. And so we have asked them, so how do you find these digital museums? What do you think of them? And taken some questions also regarding capitals. And so, for instance, there was a variable on digital capital based on the number of skills you have, as well as the number of devices. Cultural capital is based on knowledge of it's actually some memes that we showed around, and the omnivorousness. And then, some of the things that come up is that digital capital is definitely a major new determinant for doing digital cultural participation. Something novel about this survey is that we looked at non-binary, and it seems like, yeah, indeed, females continue to be greater participants. Something also quite interesting that I was really happy to find is that from these results, we have this new notion that the decision is made to give access to those who are physically unable to join. And even though we think of that, it has not really been shown. And this is, as I know, one of the first examples where it's clearly seen that this city determinant, so if you live in a city, you have greater access to culture, actually vanishes. And so you have there quite a equal access to digital museums from a rural than from a city resident. Generally, the Generation Z really prefer to participate. They see this as a normal thing. And what you see is that is generally engaging not for fun, generally engaging for education. And so this is something that, again, supports the idea that we're missing this killer app. We're taking these, from the museum perspective, we're taking this technology and just doing a literal translation. There's not yet enough innovation of a service to satisfy, for instance, this user group, and I suspect future user groups. And so the current concept of digital museum is quite limited for the actual potential museum visitor. And so not just because they're young and just because they're into technology, they will be able to engage fully in with this. There needs to be a proper service. And well, the paper and future papers will go further, and the Generation Z, so I'm happy to discuss that later. I wanted to share also in terms of some of the paid services that are developed in museums. So there's definitely this post-pandemic push where everybody had to have a website, and many institutions did move to have a website for donations or for sales, trying to compensate with the lack of visitors physically. And this is one of my favorite examples. On the right, you see the Rembrandt house. So in Amsterdam, there's a small building where you could see where Rembrandt lived near the Waterlooplein. And there was the only example we could find is they had a selection on what you wanted to donate for. So for collection and conservation, for educational programs, for the preservation, and here is for the preservation and management of the Rembrandt house, or for the exhibitions. And so you could choose the donation amount as well as the area where this donation will be given. Unfortunately, after the pandemic, this was taken down, as well as many other shops. So this is from the shop of the artist, is the zoo. But there's many institutions that actually decided after the pandemic it was not worth it, given the hard work of keeping an online website and the little sales of keeping this online website. They closed their web shops, and we're finishing the counting on the web shops that have closed post-pandemic. What we have is the websites that did open, and so from 437 museums in the Netherlands. About 96 had an online museum shop. I didn't add any images to shock you, because this is a little bit of an older study during the pandemic, in which we looked at how these objects were sold. So many of them had, you know, poor images, sometimes no image, you know, sometimes no description or anything. But many of them, like if you know the Van Gogh Museum or some of the major museums, most popular, they have extremely fashionable curated pages per object. And so the online shop is quite sophisticated, and they do really well. What we could see already is that there was a trend in terms of the storytelling tool, in which educational, exclusivity, sustainability, artistic, and social characteristics were highlighted. And so in a new study, again with Bartos, we have been looking at how do people respond to some of these characteristics in terms of their willingness to pay for them. And so we've designed this choice, a vignette survey in which individuals are to choose from gender-free objects. So that's home decor, a t-shirt, a totem bag, and socks. Or socks, I guess. And so individuals chose differently for each one of them. So it's not that they like sustainability. Well, actually, sustainability, it is, well, all the way across a major determinant, but other things are different according to the type of good. So the things that are across is, yes, sustainability, as well as supporting local and emerging artists. What we see is a little bit different is, for instance, the co-creation by the museum, or it doesn't need to be based on a famous print, or does it need to be on non-brand or environmentally engaged. Some things are not quite, we expected some stronger profiling, let's say, on preferences, but this didn't come up because people choose specifically for each object a number of characteristics, and they always chose differently. I guess the only thing that's clear is this sustainability and price, for sure, you know, lower price. Yeah. So I think, whoops, let me see. Oh yeah, and the last thing, looking at the time, the last thing I wanted to share is that there are these new rules emerging that are already, you know, sort of surprising and curious for us researchers on the AI. So on the right, you see the examples of AI directly on the new products and services developed. So profiles in social media that have that are made by AI, clearly stated, this is an AI profile, and people listen to the music or follow the profiles, like the images. And preliminary research shows that individuals like to know when it's an AI. They don't like to be fooled. They do like to know, but they also like to choose it. And sometimes maybe for curiosity, for technical reasons, but they do follow it. On the artist side, you know, this is a mix based on how threatful it appears for the job of the artist, but that might be a different discussion. And on the right, you see this combination with the robots. And so AI goes often hand in hand with robots in a museum setting. So on the top, you see the welcoming robot of the South Korean National Museum, who is able to take you to the object you want to see and tell you a story about it. And on the bottom, you see an example of personal guide that you can find on your telephone where you can chat text-based. They're developing the more sound-based, but still on a phone side. And there are other ways in which you can interact with personalities, or you can interact with, like for instance, Museum Dali has a Dali that you can talk to, and so on and so forth. But there's not yet too much research on these from the museum perspective. Oh yeah, another example was this platform where you could, no platform, console where you could discuss, or where you can talk in sign language with the robot. It's not perfect. This is an example with Korean sign language, but it is certainly an indication on how inclusivity can be broadened by these new technologies. One last comment on this AI relates to how it could improve discoverability and collections enrichment. This is generally one of the areas where museums are using it for linking their backends, so the collections backend, so all of these different silos, so linking the library with the archive and with the museum collection system, so that questions to the collection online can be richer answer, or there can be a better presentation of the results on our search. There's another whole line, which is what I showed earlier, which is this mediation of the exhibits and services for the audience. So the audience gets to see a better story, or a more personalized, or a more in movement, and so on. And then the last is generally to support administration. So, and maybe it's not administration, it's more all the procedural work. And so it helps with cleaning up text, as well as with supporting the conservation decision-making and these sort of things. It does raise the question related to authenticity and authority. To what extent these databases have been made by an individual is presented as the museum, so not a person that's changing. But now with AI, to what extent are museums going to say, this exhibition text was written by an AI, or maybe with the help of, which is some of the questions that some of the artists are requiring, that when music is presented, it's okay, but it should be said if it is to what extent made with AI. And on that, just a last comment on some of the research also that we're doing in terms of what you could call it, it used to be called crowdsourcing. We call it inclusive documentation. And there's an example here on the lower right in the National Museum of Estonia database. It's not just one museum, it's a system of museums in Estonia, national museums in Estonia. It's called MUIS, Museum Information System Database Portal. And during the pandemic, people are stuck indoors, so let's move online. And so they made a huge campaign to disseminate their photograph collection and ask people to give comments. And lots of great feedback came back. Some of it had to do with, the photo is upside down, or, that name is misspelled, but other comments were, oh, I know that machine, this is what it's used for, or this is my grandfather and this is what they were doing then, and so on and so forth. So very useful information for the museum. They have quantified the kind of work that is used to document inside the museum, so that means by specialized staff, and how much time or effort is required for these kind of collections by others, so by the community. And they came up with an ideal for 80-20, where experts are responsible for positioning the individual objects within this, let's say, knowledge graph. Every museum has their logic. So an art museum is different than a scientific museum in how they express or present their collections. And so this is very specialized knowledge with specialized vocabulary and scientists behind this. Whereas the public comes with 80% of the content, which is the storytelling, the explanation, all of the details on who is that and what is that called, and so on and so forth. And again, it's the staff that just helps to translate it to their taxonomies or their control vocabularies. And this is actually quite interesting. We're going to try, this was an exercise that was done during the pandemic, but we're going to try to replicate this in other institutions across the world and see if a similar or what kind of result can be done. I think Estonia is quite a special country, it's quite small and quite, let's say, respectful of the collections. Also, the type of collection that was disseminated is different than other type of collections. And this, again, goes back to the definition of the museum, in which museums are really trying to support this relationship with the communities in which, you might call it, these participatory practices are taking quite the prominence. Yeah, and just last thought. So we miss the killer app. I keep dreaming and always jealous of colleagues that present on film or in music industry. There's so much data, how many people click, how much things are cost, and so on and so forth. This we don't have nearly. We don't know who goes. Nobody counts their digital visitors online in museums. And so there's a lot to go. But I keep being positive, and I'm sure that soon enough we'll manage to get some decent data on museum digital visitors on all of these services, as I was proposing, to try to make sense on what does it mean to have this free service mostly. I mean, there are some services that are paid, but in general, museums offer their content for free. So obviously the goal of having the data is different. And so, yeah, I guess this cultural economics provides this useful framework to understand these changes around the digital museum and digital cultural participation. The pandemic's digital push has accelerated this change, which is undergoing, I would say, a second acceleration due to the expansion of AI in the market. Museum resource allocation reflects definitely the core values, as well as their ability to innovate and think outside the box, so the white box of the museum. And digital technology holds great potential, but generally it's to those able to take advantage of it. We still see a major digital divide in terms of the museums that have access to any of these technologies that are able to play with it in advance. And of course, the AI budgets are ridiculous. And so there's some national efforts to get some museums part of it, but it's still quite uneven. That's what I wanted to share. Thank you very much. Oh yeah, the book is coming up.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you very much, Trilce.
I'll stop sharing.
Thank you. Thank you also for reminding your affiliation with the Creative PEC as a research fellow, and I can see many of the research fellows also connected today to listen to you. So welcome to them. So I would like to open the floor for questions. I had a question from Ian Watson, but I'm struggling to understand the second part of the question. I think it is really connected to the last point that you made about some museums being able to take advantage and being able to to make money out of digitalization, if you like, so unicorns essentially, but others probably not. And I also took note of your comment about data. Clearly, as a Policy Intelligence Center, we really value data. So I think there is an open issue about how we can collect data on digital participation in museums. I have another open question by Sarah, who compliments you for the talk, and she's asking specifically on the survey that you use for your data, what is the sample size of the survey? It's quite a technical question, I guess.
Yeah, on which one? So the first one where I talked about the Generation Z. So first of all, Sarah, thank you for the question. On the first one that I talk about Generation Z, it was a large sample of over 1,000, but then after cleaning up thorough cleanup, then it turned out to be about 730 individuals. And on the other one, on the digital museums, we had, and I see that I didn't write this down, and I believe we had about 100-ish 150 or so digital participants on this one. And then maybe I try to answer to Ian. So yeah, that's right. There's a few museums that are associated with some big money. And then, for instance, in the Netherlands, there's actually a couple of digital museums. I know in South Korea, there's new, all these examples I was just there. So they just made a museum on AI and robotics, which is quite interesting. It presents the ethics of it. So when is it okay for, what is AI, what is a robot, when is it okay for a robot to take over the job of a person, and what is art, how far is it when a robot makes it, is it still art, and so on. So it's quite interesting.
Do you think, Trilce, that like many times when we see technological shocks, we tend to see that there is a skewness in the distribution of people, firms, and so on. So do you think that at the end of this process, there will be more skewness with few museums becoming even more important, and then long tail of smaller organizations that will struggle? And I really like your point about your point about socialization or community participation, right? As another trend I added because I guess to keep the human-centric nature of museums. Is that the kind of trend you're going to see? Kind of museums that are more community-based and museums that are going to be more digital?
There's never a black and white, right? I think the trend so far is that some museums are becoming quite technical, and they were already good, and now they're becoming more technical because they have the the infrastructure and the funds to advance this, and so they are in a way setting the norms, and so the standards are made by these larger institutions. And so you see, for instance, some proposals by the Getty or some proposals by Smithsonian on what are the formats for 3D, for instance, and these are then expanded and adopted by other smaller institutions. And so you do see this trend that a few larger organizations are able to define, what is the way to go forward in terms of this technology. I think on AI, that's not yet the case. You see a lot of new players. So for instance, as I mentioned, the South Korea examples, but there's many others that were not so prominent before in terms of their digital role, but now are quickly learning and copying from the Met or from other noticeable examples, and adding on their, the national strength behind them to express some of these new questions. I think it's these networks effects are always dramatic. So the Louvre will always be the Louvre. So you see that the examples that they have, they catch on, and even almost anything they do is okay, as well as with the Rijksmuseum. So they're really a trendsetter because they just have such a large audience. And I think on your other question was a participation. Yeah, that's also a sort of a niche. It's not the same department that will deal with the public, that will deal with the technology. So on the back end, they are very divided. And so participation is definitely one of those things that are coming up, but it's partially also because of the need. This need for not having to fund everything in-house. And so museums really need to find other ways to get their work done, and to get ticket sales and to get some sort of engagement with the community. So in that sense, yeah, definitely the participation will, but it's not for all museums. It's only for certain museums that will, again, right, you will have the specialization on them.
I have a clarification from Ian, a separate question from Ian that is partly related. I think they're all kind of related in terms of changes in business models, if I understand the three questions correctly. So Ian is really clarifying whether the question is really about whether digital content should be paid separately or it should be provided as a part of the service. I think Nirat is asking really whether digital museums should encourage online visitors to visit also in person. So whether there's a complementarity or substitutability between the two. And then also have an anonymous attendee asking if museum can successfully create digital resources that can trade income by themselves. The killer app might come from a commercial organization that could think in a different way and take the lead. I think that partly speaks to your last comment as well.
Yeah, so thank you, Ian, on that. Definitely. So it depends on the kind of service. And so I didn't show these other results, but we've done some surveys on when people willingness to pay in order to participate. And people want to participate for certain things, for instance, not for governance and decision making and challenging tasks, but they do want to have their voice heard in terms of what kind of programming or exhibitions they will want to see in their museum. Or maybe how to use some of the technologies, but nothing too heavy duty, just really superficial. And so that's one form of participation where we see that there could be some, and some countries are some more willing to pay than others. Those who believe that the government should provide for everything, they're not so willing. But generally, I think people are getting used to having to pay for services, so they are interested in being part of it. But that was different than than paying for the service, because then, I will say that there are other things that you can get when you just pay for a service. Is a different relationship that you have. The participatory practices are quite specific in that it's more of a long-term relationship that is trying to be built. And then,
Sorry, please. Yeah.
So just going further on the questions, what was it, Nidat, that asked about the
whether there is a substitution, whether digital visits can be used to encourage physical visits as well, or whether they should be separate.
Yeah, so this we didn't ask for that specifically. I mean, the wish for every museum is to have online visitors that come in eventually, but we didn't ask for that because that was not the goal of the project. I think the idea is that digital visitors are as valuable by themselves, and it's okay if they never visit physically. But I think from other research, it seems like when people are interested enough, they will try to make it physically. But again, when you are far away, it's just not always possible. And a digital visitor might be just as, paying so much for the online shop as any physical visitor. So in terms of on the financial remuneration, I suspect that if you have a very good website for the shop, you'll be able to get quite a bit of money for those digital attenders as well. And so we didn't focus really on that.
I think there is an additional question that I think is about technology. If technology allows us to automate tasks that humans find mundane, potentially that could help well-being and productivity. But one of the worries with AI is that creatively stimulating tasks are being removed from the remit of the workforce. I think it's about attention, right, between these two things. On one side,
oh yes, okay. So yeah, that's a great question. So there's some critics of AI that say, I mean, I want a robot that washes my clothes and cleans my dishes. I don't want somebody who can write. I want to write myself and do the fun part. And I think it's in a way it's kind of true, right? We've been misvaluing these human creativity functions, perhaps in such a way that we allow technology to really get into those instead of trying to solve some other things. But it's also some of the easy tasks are extremely difficult for these machines to to do. So it seems easy for us and mundane, but they're all actually quite a task for the little machines. And so is the creative stimulating task? Okay, so is the stimulation removed? Every time I've talked to artists, and this is some of the coming up research, is that they are very welcoming of the technology when they stay in charge, when they feel that they still use it as a tool. So it's an extension of their body. So it's something to discuss with, somebody to discuss with, if you want to call it a person. And what very interesting, one artist told me when she was down and feeling like maybe her work was not so good, she will ask the AI, what do you think of this? Is this okay? And he would always be very gentle and say, yeah, it's great, you're doing great, no, keep going. So that was also really handy. And this, maybe on a side note, people who go to therapies on AI apparently are much are better help because they're much more open. They know people judge, and so they change their story. But to the AI, they will tell everything, and so the AI will be able to give a better advice. Anyway, so I think we have different senses on how this will pick up. I do think that the more creative artists, and that are maybe more market savvy, are able to pick up on this technology to help them going to new levels of innovation and creativity. But a big part of that is to sell the story, right? To say, thanks to the machine, I've been able to go further, and not say, the machine did this for me. But anyways, that's, I think, another story. And I think I just wanted to say that was the other anonymous attendant that said the killer app might come from a commercial organization. And I just wanted to really answer to that. In the Netherlands, there's been about 10 years, the realization that museums should focus on their core activities and should let others, so private parties, commercial private parties, define the killer apps. But in the last 10 years, that has not yet happened. And so you see once in a while a firm that tries to do something, but they stay quite in their, let's say, in the small tasks. So for instance, get the Fella-handed or some of the platforms to get crowdsourcing, but they don't develop further, or the 3D, develop this 3D and making it faster and cheaper and so on, but they don't develop it further. And I think this collaboration with artists is something we need. And so it's not only with the institution, I would say, it's actually working together with artists to get new generation of ideas, as well as perhaps having that market competition is still perhaps too much. When you're a small firm, it needs to come from larger, because we know, again, in the AI, budgets tend to be quite large. And so in a way, we hope that, yes, there will be some private investment for this, but I fear that, like any major advancement in society, is also quite subsidized. It needs to be quite subsidized in order for it to pick up. Yeah.
I wanted to connect to the last point. I think this was clearly my question anyway. It seems from your story that digital museum require a lot of investment, and it is investment in terms of availability of funding, investment in knowledge, investment in skills, and also investment in collaborations. And as you say, has to put together the technical skills with the artistic skills and the competences that museums have. And on one side, going back to the initial definitions, given the purpose of museums in terms of conservation and education, is there actually a case for public support, or how can public support, what kind of public policies do we need in order for museums to succeed and enhance participation? So I guess that there are two elements in terms of inequality between, which can be intergenerational, which can be socioeconomic between those that can access and cannot access, and then also in terms of reaching out to new audiences and new consumers, right? So is there a case, and how should policymakers intervene?
Yeah, well, digital literacy is also quite important, and so it's really easy to put museums part of the curriculum in schools with their 3D examples of their collections, for instance, doing these kind of things. And somehow these are kind of the low-hanging fruit, and they're always forgotten. But you can always do more complex collaborations and this sort of thing. I think the fact that people are able to imagine based on what they know is always something we forget about. And so you do need to support this research and development in order to make a jump. If we keep going with what we already know, it's not getting us further. So we need to really give it the time to invite some free thinkers or artists, or these futurists, or however you want to call them. They have different profiles in order to maybe shake up a little bit. But with the AI, it's also quite at a global level. So you need a strong framework to sort of support this development in the right direction, or in the desired direction. And this is what we leave, I guess, to the policymakers to do, right? To what extent, what kind of things are okay, or which kind of things are not okay. you know, like the copyright and these sort of things are very clear now, but with AI, we don't have any of these things clear. And so to what extent it's okay to use anybody's content and develop something without paying anybody for it. You know, somehow this is now okay, but why? And so this needs to be revisited.
Thank you very much. I think the last point as well is particularly important, right? Because in terms of ownership of IP rights, I think that's an asset that museums can put on the table when it comes to commercialization opportunities via online digital content. So fantastic. So I think we reached the conclusion of the seminar. I'd like to thank you again, Trilce, for your brilliant talk, and definitely learned a lot today about digital museums and digitalization of culture in general and trends in digital museums. So thank you for presenting your research in our series. And I'd like to thank also our audience for their participation and engagement. Now, I'd like to take the opportunity also, if you don't mind, Trilce, to thank our founders at the Arts and Humanities Research Council. Without them, this would not be possible, and our team at Newcastle University and the Creative PEC, in particular, Elisa Millen and Tom Kyle-Jones, for all their hard work here to make this webinar happen. And so before we say goodbye, looking ahead, we are preparing a new series of seminars for the next semester. So please stay tuned, as I said previously. Keep an eye on our webpage and our social media channels. Register for our newsletters so that you can be informed and take part in the next seminar. Thank you again all for your participation. We wish you a nice festive break, surely well deserved. And we look forward to seeing you at our next seminar. Thank you again, Trilce.